You're listening to The Briefing, first broadcast on the 10th of September 2025 on Monocle Radio. The Briefing in association with Addis. Hello and welcome to The Briefing, broadcasting to you live from Studio 1 here at Midori House in London. I'm Tom Edwards. Coming up on today's programme, Monocle's Europe editor-at-large is here to tell us why, with 5 prime ministers in just 2 years, France might be the new Italy. And he'll explain why, after apparent Russian drone strikes on Poland, the Polish Prime Minister, Donald Tusk, has had to speak out.
There is no reason to panic. Life will go on as normal. We will inform citizens about all events so that there is full clarity about what is happening in the Polish sky.
Our Ed Stocker will be here to explain what might happen next. All that, plus the latest business news, and Andrew Tuck will be here with a bit of a review, a recap, and a how do you follow that take on Monocle's Quality of Life conference in Barcelona, which wrapped this past weekend. It is a show not to be missed. It's The Briefing on Monocle Radio with me, Tom Edwards. Hey, very warm welcome to The Briefing this Wednesday. Let's start with those 2 big stories dominating European newspapers and news broadcasts. The downing of a large number of Russian drones apparently violating Polish airspace, and another new Prime Minister in France. For Monocle's House View on all the latest, I'm delighted to say I'm joined now by Monocle's Europe editor-at-large, Ed Stocker. Good afternoon to you, Ed. I just saw you a few days ago. We were in Barcelona. How was your journey back? Any reflections on the Quality of Life conference?
It's been just days since our Radio Gold in Barcelona, hasn't it, Tom Edwards? Any reflections? It was just such a great event, wasn't it? I think it just went so well. So many amazing speakers. The weather was perfect. Missing it. It's rainy here in Milan. I want to be back in Barcelona.
Yeah, can I shock you, Ed? It's raining here in London. Anyway, Andrew Tuck is going to be joining me a little bit later in the show to talk more about Barcelona and indeed some reflections from the sort of post-match over in Mallorca. But listen, we've got a couple of big stories to get stuck into today. France becoming the new Italy, I said somewhat playfully in the introductory. 5 PMs in a couple of years. I think it's maybe 7 in 6. It has this extraordinary fragmentation happening, Ed. What do you make of the latest?
Yeah, I think it's 7 in 8 years, the 5th since 2022, which is the second turn of Emmanuel Macron, and the third to resign in just over a year. So many numbers to throw around there. I sort of joked when I said I was going to come on air, France is becoming Italy, but it really is true in many ways, because Italy's been characterized by this political instability and the fact that it's had, I forget now the figure, but a silly amount of prime ministers since the Second World War. And of course, it's often been sort of castigated and had its knuckles, it's been tapped, wrapped. What's the expression I'm looking for, Tom Edwards?
Wrapped on the knuckles.
Thank you, wrapped on the knuckles. I was struggling there.
On the knuckles, not on the knackers. That's a whole different
for its debt. And now we have France in a situation where its deficit is almost double the European Union required ceiling of 3% of GDP. It's really struggling with this huge political polarization. And we have this sort of a conveyor belt, seemingly, of different prime ministers. And this latest one, Sébastien Lecornu, who of course was the defence minister essentially for France, taking charge at a very difficult time, also taking charge, Tom, while these to block everything protests are happening all over the country. Apparently around 250 people have been arrested in that. Those are sort of preliminary figures. 80,000 police and gendarmes in the streets of France's major cities. This sort of strange, vaguely leftist movement, you could say an inheritor of the Gilets jaunes, the yellow jacket movement, who are sort of upset with everything, and many of them are, from lycée. They're sort of students taking to the streets to protest what they see as a system that they can't relate to. So, yeah, Le Cornu has a lot to deal with. He was saying in a speech, power was handed over him just now. François Bayrou handing over the premiership. He's currently, as we speak, sort of doing a bit of Le Cornu, that is, doing a bit of glad handing, walking around shaking hands. He already said we will need to change, and instability demands humility. So he is trying to strike a conciliatory chord here, and he's going to need to, as I said before, because the Assemblée Nationale, the French Assembly, is so divided between the far left, the far right, and even in the middle not wanting to play ball. So he needs to convince them that he is the man, that he can form a government, and he, because if it falls again, if he has to resign, France is going to be in an even deeper crisis. And of course, the future of President Emmanuel Macron will be called into serious question, his term due to end in 2027.
Just quickly on this, Le Cornu is an interesting character. He ran Macron's re-election campaign, of course. I believe he's the only minister to have served in all 8 years of Macron's presidency. If you are tasked in many ways with then delivering change or listening to others, if you're a proper Macron insider, as he appears to be, does he even have a chance to do that? Or is he kind of almost fatally holed below the waterline before he even gets started?
Yeah, you're right there. I mean, you're right about the 8 years. I mean, he was actually more to the right before. He was a former member of Les Républicains. He was a canvasser for Sarkozy. And then he moved slightly to the centre and joined the Macron camp. But he is very much an insider in that camp. He is very much a loyalist. And so, yeah, I think you're completely right. He's been talking the talk of change today in that speech he made just moments ago. But at the end of the day, Macron has decided to sort of not change anything in terms of the very model that he's built his presidency on, this sort of market-friendly centre-right way of looking at things. And of course, that seems to be out of step, not just with the way French people have voted. I mentioned before this huge far left and far right polarisation. And so, Marine Le Pen, of course, the leader of the far right Rassemblement National, saying that this is just essentially, I'm paraphrasing, she said Macron was in his bunker with his faithful. The fact that it seems to be he's really entrenched in his vision. So the big question is, A, Le Cornu, who's touted as this person who's adept at manoeuvring, can manoeuvre, and he has to do a lot of manoeuvring, and whether it's enough to save Macron and make him finish his term. Obviously, he feels strongly about this idea of statesmanship and legacy in his presidency. He will, of course, want to see it out.
Ed, let's pivot just briefly. I want to get your take on this pretty astonishing story out of Poland, or the Polish borders overnight. Russian drones. Poland states that Russian drones violated its airspace. They shot them down. NATO jets scrambled. Donald Tusk has been pretty outspoken, as one might expect. He's told his compatriots that Poland is as close to combat as it's been since the Second World War. Pretty unequivocal. What do you make of this? Is it a sort of a tweak on the nose? I don't know. What do you think could be on the Russian agenda, and what do you think Tusk and others, the collective NATO states, might do in response?
Yeah, I mean, obviously, I think it's important to note there's a lot of information swirling about in terms of numbers, and we still don't know the exact reasons. We have Russia sort of originally denying that they were anything to do with them, these drones. We have Belarus, which is essentially a sort of proxy of Russia, that's been speaking out saying that these drones had been jammed by Ukraine and therefore lost their way as a result of this jamming of their communications. Belarus saying that Russia actually alerted Poland to this fact. We also heard that Ukraine was in contact with Poland. This is not the first time that Russian drones have been inside Poland airspace. It's important to note that. Of course, Poland has a border with Ukraine, so it's very near the concert of war. Lviv is just around 50 or 60 kilometers inside Poland. Very near, inside Ukraine from Poland, so very near it. But this is the first time that forces from NATO, not just Poland, but also from other nations, from Dutch forces and Italian, shot down these drones. So it's the first time they've reacted in this way. Sometimes in the past they've been accused of being weak. The fact that, jets have been scrambled, they've essentially watched the drones pass out of their airspace without doing anything. But the point is this, really. Whether this is a direct Russian provocation or if it really is drones going wrong and mistakenly passing into Polish airspace, Poland and NATO need to be shown to be reacting decisively, because they need to show Russia that they're not joking around, that they take this very seriously. And in fact, Poland has invoked Article 4 of NATO, which means it sort of has requested urgent consultation with NATO over this matter. So expect this, Tom, to go on for a long time yet, and expect at the next NATO get-together there to be very strong words about this, because at this time, with Russia doing what it's doing, NATO is determined, and we've seen this, of course, haven't we, in the fact that NATO nations are upping their spending. We've seen that NATO is taken very importantly, and the reaction needs to be according to what's happened. So I think, we can talk about being near war. I mean, who knows if that's true? Who knows the exact motives for these drones? But certainly NATO will want to show itself as strong and as united as possible, Tom.
Ed Stocker, thanks very much for joining us on the briefing. Plenty for Ed to be following today. Lots of other news stories, though, that we're tracking here at Monocle Radio today. Let's hear from Carlotta Rebello, who's been following.
Thanks, Tom. US President Donald Trump says he is very unhappy about Israel's airstrike on Hamas members in Qatar. He told reporters in Washington that Israel did not give him enough notice to warn Qatar before the attack. The army in Nepal has imposed a nationwide curfew until Thursday morning to restore law and order after violent anti-corruption protests that prompted the government to quit. Soldiers are patrolling the streets of Kathmandu and have set up roadblocks. And a South Korean charter plane to bring home more than 300 detained workers will not leave the US as planned. Seoul says Washington caused the delay but gave no details. Officials are in urgent talks with the US to bring the workers back quickly. Those are the day's headlines. Back to you, Tom.
Thank you very much indeed, Carlotta. More headlines coming your way at the top of the next hour, whence the clock ticks past 1300 here in London. Time for a quick business roundup now. Delighted to say I'm joined by our good friend from Bloomberg. It's Ewan Potts. Good afternoon, Ewan. Let's start. Traders are betting that lower interest rates are on the cards for the US. They seem very certain, Ewan. Why so?
Hello, Tommy. I often joke that being a central bank governor is a bit of a cushy number. Good salary, just keep the ship steady. And if all else fails, just follow the Federal Reserve. Well, things not so easy at the moment if you are the man currently in charge of the Federal Reserve. Not only does Donald Trump want him to slash interest rates, he also wants him out of the job altogether. And a fascinating bit of data we've just had. The US Bureau for Labor Statistics has just carried out its annual revision to the US jobs data. And the number of workers on payrolls is likely to be revised down by more than 900,000. That's the biggest downward revision ever. That means of the 1.8 million jobs we thought that had been created in the US over the past 12 months, well, half of them actually weren't created. So this is some really key data on the health of the US labour market. Now, don't get me wrong, the US labour market is in pretty good shape. Unemployment is 4.3%. That is certainly not the nasty number you would expect in a recession, but it's definitely in less good health than we expected. And it has been slowing over many months now. That is clear. Now, the problem for the Fed is it has a dual mandate to look after prices and jobs. And the data on inflation is also moving in the wrong direction. Inflation also is not out of control, but it is above the Fed's target, and there's some signs of it being stickier than the Fed would like. So the trouble is those two things point in opposite directions. The markets are pretty certain we're going to get a Fed rate cut next week because of this slowing labour market. But as to what happens later in the year, October and the meeting in December, well, that is tricky to say. But what can be said is that I will not be putting my name forward for the next Federal Reserve chair.
Very, very sensible, Ewan, indeed, by the sounds of it. Interesting to see how Donald Trump presents that, less quick growth in job creation. We'll watch this space. Interestingly, not job growth, but job cuts at a big pharma player, the big Danish giant Novo Nordisk. Now, people might say, well, hang on a minute, look, they make Ozempic. This is selling like gangbusters. Why would you be cutting jobs? But I guess it's the popularity of this whole suite of new drugs across the board, right, including from some of their rivals, which may lie behind this?
Yeah, exactly. Bit of a surprising one, this, isn't it? If I'd asked you, Tom, a year ago to pick a couple of European companies to invest in, you might have thought that Novo Nordisk, the huge Danish company behind those blockbuster weight loss drugs, Ozempic and Wegovy, would be a pretty good bet. Well, unfortunately, if that was your pick, then your portfolio would be suffering from some rather nasty weight loss of its own. Shares down some 60% over the last year. The company today announcing 9,000 global job losses. That's 11% of its workforce, including 5,000 in Denmark, a country really not used to big layoffs, and particularly not from its biggest and most successful company. Novo Nordisk, it should be pointed out, is still a big player in the weight loss and diabetes markets. It's still growing sales, but it has cut its profits forecast, in fact, for a third time this year. Its fortunes really started to shift last year when an even stronger experimental drug proved disappointing. And I think investors really fear that its big rival US company Eli Lilly is stealing a march on Novo Nordisk, particularly in the hunt for a weight loss drug that you can take orally rather than injecting. That's really the holy grail of all of this business. The company says the job losses are part of a push to simplify the organisation, also to improve decision making and to reallocate resources to where they can get more growth. But certainly it has not been a good year to be a shareholder in Novo Nordisk.
Indeed, Ewan. Great stories, superb insights, as we've come to expect. Ewan, thanks for being with us here on The Briefing on Monocle Radio. You're back with The Briefing on Monocle Radio. I'm delighted to say I'm joined by a very special guest here in the studio. It's Monocle's editor-in-chief, Andrew Tuck.
I'm here, alive.
Now, I don't know, is this professional? Let's pull the curtain back. With how much time spare did you make it into the studio? I'm going to start with minus 30 seconds.
Okay, so the truth is, I was told 11 times what time I had to be here in the studio. And then I looked at the clock and I may have said a swear word. And then I started running. And at that time, one of the producers was opening the door for me and pushing me down the stairs. Sorry.
Now, what's funny is that is probably a similar style that you were following across various venues in Barcelona, running around like a something asked fly, from venue to venue, looking after people, chairing panels, introducing things, bussing drinks. And then you've zoomed on to Mallorca. First things first. Now the dust has settled. What a great couple of days it was, Andrew. Very happy with how things went at the Monocle Quality of Life Conference?
Look, I think for anybody who organises events, there's all the planning that goes into these things that gives you the structure, that puts in some safety nets. But then there's also serendipity. There's also just some things that can screw you up or make it a delight. And I don't know how, but everything just was a delight. So the weather was perfect. For people who'd been in Northern Europe the week before, it was getting chilly. Autumn was on their heels. Suddenly we were back in summer. Everyone was like cracking out the shorts again. Every venue...
Not me, I should say. Resolutely still trousers.
I've only ever seen your little legs in football shorts.
And that's the right place for them to be.
Okay.
Like all legs.
Anyway, let's talk about your legs. The venues were amazing. The welcome was at the Miro Foundation.
Oh,
this view across the city. Everywhere we went, the food was good. People were in an amazing mood. And then we had a day that just unfolded on stage of discussions and talks that were funny, enlightening, moving. We touched all the emotions, and it ended with most people crying. It was desperate to get out.
Now, Andrew, behave yourself. Why was everyone weeping at the end? It was one of the most arresting spectacles I think I've ever seen, not just in a conference setting, but frankly, anywhere. Tell us.
Well, who'd imagine me perched on your shoulders would be enough to make get that as the prize? No, we some time ago did a story in the magazine about Castellers, which is the Catalan tradition of building human towers, and some of these, they're multiple stories high. And even when we edited the story in the magazine, I kept on finding myself caught in the emotion of the photographs, because they're based on trust. So the strongest go at the base, and then you build up more layers until at the very top a child goes. Now, we made a little film about it, which we played at the end. Now, even for some of our staff, they didn't know that we had managed to persuade a very celebrated troupe of Castellers to come to the venue. So as the film finished, it's the end of the day, people were thinking, I'm going to nip back to the hotel, put my feet up. The back doors open, and then coming down the stairs, come 70 people, Castellers. And 70 people, it turns out, is a lot of people, because I was on stage, and you watch them coming.
It took them a second to get in there.
And then they gathered right in front of us on stage, and even people from Barcelona said, "Look, it's funny. We see it in town squares all the time. We've seen it on big in arenas, but to see it in this intimate space of the Petit Palau, the Palau de la Música Catalana, it was just weirdly arresting. And I think because people had all day been talking about how we come together, look after each other, unite, build better communities. It was, without saying a word, they summed up the whole damn thing in the gesture of building these two human.
It was incredible. And if you look, what's wonderful about the photographs, which are in the expo, in which issue, Andrew? Can you remember? I can't actually remember which.
Putting me on the spot.
Right. Well, no,
it's not Mastermind.
During the summer, I think. But you see these wonderful, because of the people at the bottom of the Castel, when they're sort of closer to the centre, they can't even really see out. So they kind of lie their heads upon one another, and the hands are laid on one another. There is something profoundly intimate about it, and yet it's so expressive. You don't actually need to know the fascinating cultural context to understand its resonance as a piece of human theatre and social sort of cohesion. It was absolutely extraordinary. Can I tell you one of my highlights? This was a conversation you had about architecture, and we had a few great architects. Nick Manise spoke to some super interesting and a real interesting sort of diversity of views and experiences. But there was a wonderful discussion about building, architecture for religious expression, to build a mosque, and it took some really kind of interesting turns. And it was one of those conversations where I kept coming back to it. The next day, the day after. Tell us about that one.
Turkish architect called Emre Aralat, who again I met at another event, and we got chatting, and there was something about him. He's I guess he's in his 60s maybe, but he's just thought about things for a long time, and he was commissioned to make a mosque in Turkey on the edge of Istanbul. Now, just scrub all from your mind all impressions of what you think a mosque would look like. This is made from stone. The minaret is more of a kind of a square pillar. It's free almost of all adornment inside it. It takes none of the Ottoman cues. It starts from scratch. So he was amazing at telling the story of the Sankaklar mosque and how it got built. But what he was also good at talking about was how resist starting a creative process if you're always going to start at the same point and always going to go along the same route. How about you pause a little bit and you fight for something that might be a little bit different? So he's all about context, time and place, and making something that feels opposite. So it was a great conversation, because he was talking about a mosque, but I think he left everyone thinking, okay, maybe I could do something a bit different. And actually, there was a gentleman from the UAE who I spoke to afterwards, and he said to me, he said, extraordinary. He said, I'm a practicing Muslim. He said, I've just never seen a mosque like that, thought about the process, and he had stripped it back to the essence, because as he explained, in the end, a mosque just needs to be a place that's clean. That's the only thing you need, a clean place, and you can start praying. And he took it right back to the essence.
And do you need to be a religious man to design a wonderful religious building?
No, he
was funny, Emre, about that, wasn't he?
He was funny. He said, look, you don't need to have cancer to design an oncology unit? Why do you have to be incredibly pious to create a mosque or a church? And he's not. He's honestly, he's not a huge believer. He's faithful, but he's not. He's not an extremely religious person. But he ended up designing perhaps one of the most beautiful religious spaces you've ever seen.
And that was just the tip of the iceberg of insights and fascination revealed at the Monocle Quality of Life conference. I didn't even get to ask you about your 3-day Andrew Tuck-led after party.
Oh yeah, we took some of our patron readers to Mallorca for a couple of days. It was, in the end, it turned out to be 5 days. Just before I go, did you enjoy it?
It was absolutely sensational. I am going to go out on a limb, Andrew, and say I think it was the best of the 10 editions thus far. What do you reckon?
I think it is. I was saying to people afterwards, I think that maybe we should do a Glastonbury and have a fallow year next year.
I'm up for that. I need the recovery time. Still wearing it. Andrew Tuck, thanks for that. Listen and look out for plenty more about the Quality of Life conference in print, in digital and on air, of course, here at Monocle Radio. And that is all for this edition of The Briefing, expertly produced by Laura Kramer. Our researcher was Daniela Braw-Smith and our studio manager was Flynn Simons. May I send him farewell. Go well into the good night, Flynn. It's his farewell briefing. And he didn't make a single error in the show, as he never does. Good luck, Flynn. The Briefing is back tomorrow at the same time, noon in London. I'm Tom Edwards. Goodbye and thanks for listening.